Can I do what?
You think you could get through it if I sit here?
If you just won't make those faces at me. Yeah, I probably could. Just keep an eye on him. Okay, good morning, everybody. How are we doing? It's good to see you guys. It warms my heart. How's that for an old Hebraism, figure of speech, right? Warms my heart. But we all know what that means, right? So figures of speech are good things. So as we see on the screen, we're continuing our Gospel according to Luke, the good news, the good spell, Old English good news. In Greek, it's euangelion, the good, and the same word that we get angel from. And angel, angelos, just means messenger. So in the writings, the good message is really what this says. Every time you see gospel, think, if you want to really translate it, it's the good message, the true message. Or if you want to use Old English, it's the good news. Oh, and it's the best news, isn't it? It's astonishing, incredible news that you human beings, all the way back to ancient times when this message was given, you're not some crazy random accident. You're here for a purpose. Let's figure it out. You're not some thing that popped out of a big battle between jealous gods that were just like big, giant, powerful humans. They get mad at each other. They fight, and to help fight, they create these things called humans. That was the idea of some peoples of the day. Oh, you know, our people were created by this God over here, and our people were created by this God over here, and our God is much better than your God, so therefore we're okay to beat you up and kill you. But notice the scriptures all the way back in the first literary unit, Genesis 1, says, no, all of you guys are the same. Same creation, made in the image, the teshlim in Hebrew, the shadow, the whatever that tells us of God himself. You're not like some random accident. Oh, what good news this is. And we see this in the entire sweep of all of the scriptures, what we call the Old Testament, a term that I don't really like very much. Nowhere does the Bible call itself the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now, there is some word covenant that we use, but it almost implies to us when we say Old Testament that, oh, that's like old stuff. It doesn't matter at all to us. But you know, oh, I see Miss Lana over here. Miss Lana, I remember a couple of weeks ago, you had a most wonderful comment. I almost stood and applauded. You said, look, the Old Testament is important stuff, right? It tells us part of the plan and the passion and the promise of God. What we call the New Testament is just phase 2 of the plan. And the early Christians, we never think about this, but it's totally true. The early Christians, for the first probably 20, 30, maybe 40 years, had only the old scriptures. And so when you see these guys talking about the scriptures, they're talking about what we call the Old Testament, because the New Testament was not yet written, and it was not yet codified into this thing that we have inherited that we call the New Testament. So we are so fortunate. Oh, we are so fortunate in many, many ways that we have the old scriptures, and as Miss Lana said, are very, very important. And we have the newer scriptures.
But the blessing was they had the old with an eye towards knowing that they were writing, for lack of a better term, gospel. They were writing
Good news.
they were writing
The good message.
They were writing what we would then need for, like you poignantly said, phase 2.
That's right. When I think about it, you know, the Bible, interestingly, nowhere in the Bible does the Bible call itself the Bible. It calls itself the Holy Writings, typically, or something like that, or just the writings, right? And it's one God, one plan, and sometimes we divide it up as if we know what's happening, really. We divide it up. Oh, that doesn't matter anymore. This doesn't matter. One plan, one flow, one phase, phase 2, phase 1. And the early Christians, as I mentioned before, and I just want to reemphasize it, what did they have? They had the Tanakh, the 5 books of Moses, the Torah. They had the Nevi'im, the prophets, and they had the Ketuvim. And therefore we get this acronym, Tanakh. And so if you have a Hebrew Bible, it'll say typically Tanakh on the outside, that acronym. Torah, 5 books of Moses. Nevi'im, Navi is Hebrew for prophet, the prophet's writings. And then Ketuvim, the other writings, the Psalms, etc. That's what they had. That was their stuff. And most of them had it memorized. Oh, my word. In fact, 13-year-old boys were expected to have the whole Torah memorized, 5 books of Moses. I'm not sure I could do that. I mean, to be able to quote it accurately, just like that. So they were really into it. And then when the Newer Testament rolled around, oh, what it revealed. Oh, my goodness, what it revealed. Part of which is Luke, right, that we have today. So let's look in Luke. So, as you know, Tom is traveling. He'll be back, if everything goes according to plan, next week, and it works out great because that's about when Fellows and I will be doing a little bit of traveling. So it was just a delight that this worked out so well that I could sub for him. And so happy to do so. We sure appreciate Tom and all the effort he puts in the class. And so he'll be back next week. I promised him we would finish up Luke so he could begin, hopefully, in Luke Volume 2, which we call the Book of the Activities, the Acts of the Apostles. And so Luke Book 1, Luke Book 2. So let's see if we can finish Luke Book 2. As I've alluded to before, every book of the Bible, Luke, Genesis, it doesn't matter. Every book of the Bible has a structure, a flow, a purpose, a style, a message, most importantly, and it's trying to tell us something using this terrible thing that we have, but it's all that we have, called language. It's all that we've got. And using language to try to bring us the message. But every book has a purpose, a style, etc. And if we look inside that book and try to grasp the overall structure and the flow, often we can see what Luke had in mind, what Matthew had in mind. What did Paul have in mind when he wrote the letter that we call 1 Corinthians? He had some very definite things in mind that he was logically approaching, trying to discuss, to send this message to them. In their culture, in their language. Now we benefit from having this because we can look at it and learn and grow and increase our knowledge and get the message from our Father. Our Father, just like he was Paul's father. He was the father of all the Israelites, our Father. So we're just so fortunate. So let's look and see some more about Luke's style, and then we'll quickly segue into the last little epilogue that is only in Luke. I always ask myself, why did only Luke give us this account? Now, I'm going to say story very often. When I do, I mean, as Chris mentioned previously, we have this crazy idea in our modern language here in 21st century America that story means a falsehood. No, it's a shortened form of the word history, something that actually happened, presented in a form, a story. And so when I say story, I'm taking off the H and the I, just from habit. So when I say the greatest story ever told, I mean the greatest history, the greatest presentation of facts that happened, the story. And indeed, it is the greatest story ever told. So here on the screen, English Standard Version, like I said, my favorite literal version. I could equally use New King James, wonderful version, Old King James, fantastic version, a number of others, but we'll use the ESV. And so we remember Luke's account of the women, the disciples, there were about 120-ish, as we know, about 120 of these disciples, following learners, is all disciple means, and they were with Jesus. He had an entourage of women and men. Of course, we know that culture of that day was strongly patristic. It was not even considered quite polite for women to be out by themselves without a male relative, husband, brother, father, something like that. That's just their culture. So the fact that Jesus had this group of women disciples is culturally quite astonishing. But it's invisible to us because it's not astonishing to us. We say, well, of course. But we remember Sunday morning arose. The women went out to the tomb, this carved hole in a stone hillside that would typically have a big rock rolled in front of it, and they were going to bring, as was their custom, some spices to anoint the body in honor, to control the odor. About a year later, the family would come in, collect the bones, and put the bones in a bone box, an ossuary. And they came to the tomb, and there was no body. The stone was rolled away. We remember that. Now, in some of the other gospel accounts, we read that the women were worried about who was going to roll this great big rock out of the way. Take 3 or 4 really hefty guys to move this thing. And they were worried about that, but when they got there, it was already moved. And so Luke just jumps to the point. He doesn't mention that. He just jumps. The tomb was empty. They look and there's no body. And while they're looking, they're pondering, Luke says. They're marveling. They don't quite know what's happening. And then they see these two guys in lightning garments, would be the best literal translation from the Greek that Luke used. Bright as lightning. Clearly not just regular people. And these guys said to them, "Why are you looking for the living one among the dead? Don't you remember," and here's this beautiful rhetorical question that the angels, the messengers of God, are asking the women, "Don't you remember in Galilee? He told you this. He said, I have to be handed over to these corrupt rulers of the religious authority. I have to be crucified and then rise again on the third day. Don't you remember?" And then beautifully Luke records for us that then they went, "Oh, of course we remember, right? We remember now. We remember." In Luke 18, in fact, let's pop over there just 1 second. Luke 18, I've got it bookmarked already. Here's Luke 18. And if we go down to verse 31, we see this header that is put in by the editors. This is not in the original text. So you've got to be careful. That may be what is upcoming, or the person that put that in might be not quite right. So I kind of ignore those, really, just like I kind of ignore verse numbers because they didn't exist for the first 1,500 years of Christianity. Isn't that amazing? For the first 1,500 years, Christians just had flowing text, which is what it's intended to be. We see the numbers and we think that's one thought. Every number is one thought, and we try to break it up. Sometimes it is, sometimes not. So Jesus was talking to 12, verse 31, and Jesus said to the 12, "Look, we're going up to Jerusalem, and everything that is written about the Son of Man," that beautiful figure of speech that he always uses for himself, everything that was written about the Son of Man by the prophets will be accomplished. He'll be delivered to the Gentiles, the Roman rulers, who were the only ones that had the authority in that system, the legal authority, to execute somebody. The religious rulers could beat you up, whip you, but they could not kill you. Rome said, "No. All of you client states of Rome, we reserve that right. Rome." Now, if you want to whip them, beat them, jail them, go ahead. Knock yourself out. No executions, though. He'll be mocked and shamefully treated and spit upon, and after flogging him, they will kill him, and on the third day he'll rise. And look at verse 34. Isn't this like really sad? "But they understood none of these things." And this was the 12, the ones that had been with Jesus for at least 2 years. Now, we often say 3 years. His ministry was 3 years. But if you look at the Gospel of John, you see that Jesus started his official ministry on a Passover. Another Passover came by, and then he was killed on the next Passover that's mentioned. 3 Passovers, but what's the interlude between each of those? 1 year. So 1 year, 1 year. 2 short years to teach these guys all the stuff they needed, to show them, to try to get this in their thick heads. And I often think, oh, I would have been so much more receptive. I don't think so. I don't. My daddy always said, "Boy, you're awful hard-headed." Oh, there's like a good Hebrew-type concrete figure of speech. Your head is hard, right? But we know what that means. Stubborn. Let's go back to Luke 24, our last chapter. So these two guys in lightning clothes told the ladies, "Look, why are you looking for the living one among the dead? Don't you remember this?" And then they did. And then notice Luke has delayed telling us the identity of the ladies until after the scene has set. After he set the scene of what happened. They came, know Jesus, angels said this, then they remembered. Only then does Luke tell us who they were. Mary of the village of Magdala on the northwest coast of the Sea of Galilee. Mary, James's mom. As I mentioned, Miriam, was one of the most common names in that time, in that place. Salome was a second. Joanna was like, oh goodness, I looked this up a while ago. Number 5. Joanna was 5th popular. So you can imagine if you go in a group of women, there's going to be a bunch of Marys, quite a few Salomes, quite a few Joannas. Of course, that's just the way it is. Then they went back, and here's another very sad tragedy of the scriptures. They ran back to the 11 apostles, because Judas was gone, ran back to the 11 and all the other entourage. Remember, we'll find later in the book of the activities, there are about 120 of these people together, disciples, men, women. But of course, the 11 were the organizing, the authoritative, the ruling group. And so they went back and told the 11, these guys have spent 2 long years with Jesus, face to face, hot and cold, day and night, camping out in towns, in the wilderness. And they still didn't quite get it, and they ran back and they said to them, very tragically, there's no body. There's no body. We saw these 2 lightning guys, and they said, why are you looking for the living one among the dead? And then what did the 11 do, the apostles? They rejoiced and said, he's risen, blah, blah, blah. No, not yet. They still hadn't got it. They said, this is just a idle tale, is how most of the English translations handle this. A foolish tale. But Peter, Simon Peter, whom Jesus nicknamed Rocky, Kippa in Aramaic means rock. Now in Greek we have that with the Greek masculine name ending, Cephas. Kephas, it would be really Rocky. Kippa, the rock. His Hebrew name, Shimon, Simon in English. But Peter, Petros, means rock in Greek. So Kippa in Aramaic means rock. Petros in Greek means rock. So his nickname was Rocky, basically, rock. He couldn't stand it though, right? He wasn't sure, so he ran to the tomb. And then Luke is going to leave us hanging in his story that he's recounting for us. He's going to leave us hanging. Peter sees that it's true, there's no body, and then he just goes back wondering, marveling, astonished at what happened. Leaves us hanging. I want to know what else happened then. What did Peter tell the guys? Did he change his mind? What were the other 120-ish people talking about? What did the other 11 believe when Peter came back? But Luke leaves us hanging. Instead, he segues into this unique thing that only exists in the gospel according to Luke, and that's the road to Emmaus. Why did he do this? There's a reason. I guarantee it. I may not know exactly what it is. Luke's style, Luke's presentation, what point is he trying to make? So the road to Emmaus. Let's look at this, verse 13 of the last chapter of Luke. So that very day, 2 of them, the disciples, the 120-ish, were going to a village named Emmaus, 7 miles away, roughly. Now, the implication is they were in Jerusalem. They were part of the group of disciples that followed Jesus there. They knew what happened. They were going home. That's the implication. We've got to be careful by implications because the Scripture is not explicit about this. But that's the strong implication. And so they were walking, which is the only way to get there, right, unless you had a donkey to ride or something. They were walking. It's only 7 miles, a couple of hours, brisk walk. And they were talking about all the stuff that had happened, of course. Can you imagine what they were saying to each other? They're both disciples. Luke only gives us one name, Cleopas, just one name. Why? Only him? I don't know. My conjecture is maybe he was well known enough in the day that if somebody read this in the day, they could go ask Cleopas, are you the Cleopas? Yeah, is this real? Maybe. Is it to give us a connection? Once we know somebody's name, we feel a bit more connected to the person. It's just human nature. Is it to connect us later with this person and help us realize these are real people with real problems and real doubts and real failings and real strengths and real weaknesses, just like us? Maybe. So they were talking about all the things that happened, and then verse 15 said, now Jesus himself, interesting phrase, Jesus himself. He could have said, and Jesus came along, but he's emphasizing it was Jesus himself came along. And he drew near to them, and verse 16, very interesting, but, however, their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. Interesting. Is that a figure of speech? It just means they could not recognize the resurrection body of Jesus. The last time they saw him, he was beat up, bleeding, skinny, scrawny, half dead, and then all the way dead. Is that why? Or is it a divine prevention? The force of Luke's text seems to me to indicate it's a divine prohibition on recognizing at this moment. But that's just my opinion. And so Jesus said to them, verse 17, so what is this conversation that you guys are having? Now, colloquially today, we'd probably say, what are you guys talking about? You know, I can see you're really engaged in something. I can see this look on your face like you're just really sad, gloomy, upset, disheartened about something. What are you talking about? And they stood still. Now, interestingly, in the Greek, that stood still means like sudden, just halt. Like, what? And you can kind of get that feeling from Cleopas in the response that he gives to Jesus. They halted. They're shocked. And Cleopas said, are you the only sojourner, the only visitor in all of Jerusalem that does not know the stuff that's been going on these days? Does that kind of give you a feeling of incredulousness, of astonishment that you don't know? Everybody knows is kind of the idea. You don't know, and they're kind of shocked by this. They just like shocked to a standstill. And Jesus said to them, what? Now, by implication, things. Luke just says, he says what? But we say what things, make it easier for us to understand. And they said, concerning Jesus. Now, they would have almost certainly, I guarantee, they would have said his Hebrew name, Yehoshua, or maybe the shorter form, Yeshua, which wonderfully means Yah-Shua, Yahweh saves. Isn't that beautiful? His very name. Now, when we inherit the English form of that Jesus, we kind of lose that meaning. But it's what we have. Concerning Jesus the Nazarene, a man who was a mighty prophet in works and words, is how Luke phrases it. In works and words. Basically, another figure of speech, everything he was doing was congruent together. What he did, what he said, was one thing. And he was mighty. But notice he was a prophet. Isn't that a little bit sad, a prophet? Well, maybe. But now we don't know exactly what they meant by that word prophet. A prophet speaks on behalf of God. That's the Old Testament definition. Now, sometimes they demonstrate that they are a true prophet by being able to predict a future event, but that's not the main meaning of prophet, predicting the future. It's speaking on behalf of God, basically. Bringing a message from God, almost like an angel. Although there's another Hebrew word, malach, that means angel in Hebrew. But nevertheless, well, we're talking about Jesus of Nazareth, the man who is a mighty prophet before God and everybody, and we were talking about how our chief priests and our rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. Now here's one of the saddest sentences in all of Luke, 21. But we had hoped. Now this sounds like past tense, but Luke used an imperfect verb here, which means occurring in the past, but continuing even right now. Started in the past, but it's continuing even now. So I would translate this, we were hoping, then and now. It's almost like we're still hoping, but our hopes have been dashed. Our hopes have been dashed. No wonder they're gloomy and sad. But we're still kind of hoping. But we had hoped he was the one to redeem Israel. Better translation, free, set free. Set free. And we know a lot of the people thought the great Messiah, the Messiah, the line of David will come back, and most of them thought to reestablish the kingdom of David, like King David was in the glory days of old Israel, about 1000 BC-ish. And then Israel would be powerful again, and glorious again, and rich again, and there would be peace, there would be shalom all over. We thought he was going to be the one that was going to set Israel free. However, it's been 3 days since all these things happened. Interesting, the way Luke phrases it. And besides all this, it's been 3 days. It's like nothing happened. Nothing happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early morning, and when they did not find the body, they came back. And they said they had seen angels who said he was alive. And some of those who were with us went to the tomb, and they found it just exactly like the women had said, but they did not see him. And then now, famously, we have Jesus' response to these guys. The ESV says, "O foolish ones." Now, this is a tough one to translate, because when we think of a foolish one, what do we think of? an idiot, the word that we're not supposed to teach our kids to say, stupid. Don't say that, stupid. All right? And so it's very pejorative, isn't it? In our modern foolish one. Does anybody else have another version besides ESV that's different than foolish ones? If so, I'm curious what you have. I just don't remember. I tried to look over about 3 literals, a couple of dynamics, and 2 or 3 paraphrases for everything. But I just don't. Fools. Okay, fools. What Luke said is, he said, anoetai, no brain. Well, does that mean fool? Or does it mean you're not thinking, you're not using the brain that you've got? That's the way I would take it, but I don't know one English word that I could drop in to replace that. Use your brain. Maybe we could use that current figure of speech. Use your brain, guys. Not like you're fools, you're not idiots, you're not stupid. You haven't been using your brains, basically. And then Jesus is going to drop in another very famous Hebrew figure of speech. Oh, you people that are not using your brains, and you that are slow of heart to believe the prophets. Isn't that a wonderful figure of speech? You're slow of heart. In fact, it uses the same Greek terminology that physicians use, bradycardia, slow heart. Slow of heart. What does that mean? Does that mean their heart suddenly started beating below 40 beats per minute? Of course not, right? We're trying to interpret it literally. But what does it really mean? Slow of heart. Back in those days, your heart was the center of your emotions, your consciousness, your mind. Now we know it's a blood pump. But we're so powerfully influenced by the stuff we've inherited. Don't we still use that word heart that way? Oh, Chris, just bless your heart. Well, that kid is pretty tender-hearted. And we send a Valentine's card. What do you always put on it? A little heart. And what's that old song from the 60s? Cupid, bend back your bow and let your arrow go straight to my lover's heart. Right? Cupid, this Roman deity from the Roman pantheon, shoot an arrow in your heart. Why? That's the center of love. Now, of course, today we know, technologically, medically, that is not right. Somebody has a heart transplant, it's the same person. But still, that is in our language system, and we understand what it means today, right? Bless your heart, tender-hearted, hard-hearted. In fact, I said that on a few minutes ago. I said, it warms my heart to see you. Well, did my heart go up from 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 Fahrenheit? I don't think so. But right, we both knew exactly what I meant. It warms my heart. And I meant that in the way that I meant it, not literally. Oh, slow of heart. You guys are just so reluctant to believe the prophets. You're not using your brain. You're not thinking about the prophets. And I think Jesus is probably thinking back about to Luke 18. Remember when Jesus told them for the 3rd time, look, everybody, everything the prophets wrote about me has to be accomplished. I'm going to be turned over, I'm going to be killed, I'm going to be raised the 3rd day. 3rd time. How many times do I have to tell you? Well, that's a very hard concept to grasp. Now, we are so blessed by being able to think about this easier because we have all this 2,000 years of Christian history and tradition to help us, but they didn't have this. So maybe it was just really hard for them. So, verse 27, beginning with Moses and the prophets, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, maybe it started at Genesis 3. It talked about the seed of Eve, Chava in Hebrew, will crush the head of the adversary. Maybe? I don't know. Would it not be so wonderful if you could have been a little bug on Cleopas' shoulder and listened to that sermon? He interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Now, of course, at this time, they don't know who himself is. They don't know this is Jesus. This is just some guy. They don't know yet. And so this guy that came up to them, it says, use your brains, guys. Your heart is so slow to believe the writings of the prophets. Here, let me, as my granddad would say, let me explain to you what this means. And so he did. Let me explain it. Now, of course, all this is memorized. He hasn't memorized. They have memorized. And they're walking this 2-3 hour walk, and they're getting this beautiful lesson on the prophets. Verse 28, so they drew near to the village of Emmaus where they were going, and he acted like he was going a little bit further, but they urged him strongly. Now, interesting, the word Greek Luke used there was, let's see if I can actually remember it. No, it escapes my brain, but it means force to stay. In other words, we might say, they would not take no for an answer. They would not take no for an answer. So they had to exercise a bunch of will and effort for Jesus to stay. What would have happened if they didn't exercise that aggressive effort to make him stay? Would Jesus have just walked on and they would have never known who it was? We don't know. That's all conjecture. But they had to be so engaged with this stranger. They said, no, you got to stay. Look, it's day's getting short. You got to stay. You got to stay. And they basically forced him to stay. And when they did, he became kind of the host of their dinner. So he went in to stay with them, and now verse 30. And when he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. And then what's the very next sentence? And then their eyes were opened. This is so interesting. Why did they recognize him then? Was it a divine application of force of some kind? Maybe. Was it that then they recognized the way that Jesus prayed to bless the bread? And that, boom, is what clicked it. Now the physical body doesn't so much matter. They hear the tone of the prayer, they hear the words of the prayer. I don't know, sometimes I think there's a very, very ancient prayer of blessing before food. Hebrew prayer. It goes, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lachem min haaretz. Blessed are you, O Lord, our God, King of Olam, King of everything, King of the universe. I don't know what English word to drop in. I'm just going to say universe. Blessed are you, O Lord, our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth, in recognition that everything you got comes from the Lord. Isn't that beautiful? So short. Was that the prayer? I don't know. Was it the tone? Was it the prayer? Or was it a divine application of force? I don't know. I wonder sometimes. But what next happened? Before they could ask him, apparently, any other question, before they could even express like extra astonishment, what happened? Yes, ma'am? Okay.
When Paul, they saw the light, what had happened. Paul heard the voice, but the other men that was with him did not.
Yeah, good question. So the question was, could this be something like when Paul was on the road to Damascus and the great light shone around him and all of his companions could see nothing, but Paul could see and he heard, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? I am the Lord Jesus. It is difficult for you to kick against the goat, like if you're poking goats or cows to go a certain way with the sharp stick. You're kicking against my plan for you, basically. That's a good question. Is it the same thing? If it's a divine application of force, then I think yes. I think the answer is clearly yes. God is applying power to withhold that recognition. We don't know for sure, of course. We have no idea. But it could very well be, I think.
It's a very interesting thing that's transpiring here. And when they compel him, that's the word.
Force him, yeah.
Yeah, it's this.
We're not going to let you go on.
Yeah,
Stay here.
The same word we kind of get our paramilitary idea from, right? We're going to employ force, right, to keep these people. So we're going to send a paramilitary group in for something.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
And so
We're going to force you to stay.
Yeah, and so they're forced once they come in and Jesus makes this promise that if I stand at the door of your heart knocking, and if you let me in, I'll come in and dine and sup with you. And then you have this opening of their eyes.
Yeah, that's an interesting little parallelism there, isn't it? Jesus said, look, if you'll just, when I knock at the door, if you'll let me in, I'll dine with you, and then we'll have a discussion, and I'll let you know the message. If these guys hadn't insisted, he wouldn't have dined, right? And he would not have been revealed. And then he vanished from their sight. Well, a normal body can't do that, but I guess a resurrection body can. Well, plus it's the power of Jesus, right? My goodness. And so Cleopas and the other person said to each other, verse 32, didn't our hearts burn within us? Here's another figure of speech. What does that mean in modern 2022 America? Didn't our heart burn within us? Does that mean it was on flaming fire? Coals? Well, we know what it means, right? There was something special. There was something we couldn't quite grasp. It was like deep inside. I could feel it, but I didn't quite know what it was. Our hearts were burning. That's kind of a good way to say it. While he was talking to us on the road and when he opened to us the scriptures, and so they got up right away and went back to Jerusalem, 7 more miles, right? I bet they hot-footed it the 7 miles back. Oh, yes, sir.
I was just going to say, they were slow apart to believe. I think this was the turning of that. They were becoming faster apart to believe. Something was stirred with them.
And I guess sometimes with different people on their journey, something has to happen. Well, like Paul. What had happened to Paul? He was super devoted to God. He was super religious. He said of himself, a Pharisee of Pharisees. He was so devoted that he was going to go wipe out these nasty blasphemers that were promoting this Nazarite rabbi as being the Son of God. That's the most blasphemous thing you can say. And Paul was saying basically, I am not going to stand for it. I don't care if I have to travel across this land and wipe these people out. So be it. But what did it take to click his brain? It took this amazing message on the Damascus Road. Now, hopefully, our hearts will not be quite as slow. We won't be so indoctrinated by our religious beliefs that we miss the living Jesus, I hope. So they ran back to Jerusalem. They found the 11, and the 11 said to them, verse 34, they said, the Lord has risen indeed. Now, interestingly, the word that Luke uses, ontos, means like really. So basically what they were saying is, the Lord really arose. To me, it carries like this little bit of astonishment, amazement. The Lord really arose. And then Cleopas says, yes, let us tell you our story and how we recognized him. Very interestingly, Luke emphasizes, when do we recognize him? In the breaking of the bread. Now, interesting, breaking of bread is just a common figure of speech. It just means eating. So I could, go to Charles and I'd say, Charles, why don't you come over and break bread with us? And it's a more archaic figure of speech these days, but it just means have a meal. That's all it means. So how do we know in the New Testament when it says breaking bread? Are they talking about the emblems that Jesus implemented to remember Jesus? Interesting. I think we can tell. In Greek, you can either use the definite article. In English, it'd be the, T-H-E, or you cannot. It's optional. You can use it for emphasis, leave it out. Every time I can find it's clearly talking about what we call Lord's Supper communion, it says the breaking of the bread. When it's talking about having a meal, it just says breaking bread. No these.
And Luke stylizes that.
Luke emphasizes it so powerfully. While they were discussing these things, Jesus appeared before them and said, Shalom. Now in English, peace, right? Peace. Shalom. But shalom in Hebrew means much more than just absence of strife. It means everything's the way it ought to be. Do you have shalom in your life? Are things going? Are you in your good place? Do you have, yes, peace, absence of strife, but goodness and all kinds of stuff? And they were startled and frightened. The better words there are terrified and filled full of fear. They were scared to death, is how we might say it today as a colloquial figure of speech. They were scared to death and thought it was a ghost. And Jesus said to them, because Jesus could say they were scared to death, he said, why are you so troubled and why are you doubting in your hearts? Look, see my hands and feet? It's me. Touch me and see. A spirit, a ghost doesn't have flesh and bones, but look, here you go. Flesh and bones. And he showed them his hands and his feet, and they were still disbelieving for joy. Another figure of speech. We might today say, it was too good to be true. They couldn't quite believe it. Was just too good to be true. How can you believe this? It's too wonderful. It's too miraculous. And I think Jesus then said to them, do you guys have anything to eat? I think he could see these guys still weren't convinced, right? So I thought, look, if I sit down and have a piece of fish and eat or something, they can realize it's me, for real, a person, not a spirit. And so he did. And then he said to them, look, again, I told you guys earlier that everything written about me in the law and the prophets, law of Moses and the prophets, and the Psalms must be true. Thus it is written, the Christ, the anointed one, the Messiah, must suffer and on the third day rise and be proclaimed to all nations. And you guys are witnesses. Here's an interesting thing that I probably read like a million times and just latched onto it. Notice what Luke is linking to forgiveness of sins. He's linking very specifically repentance for forgiveness of sins. And you know what? He does the same thing in Acts 3. He does the same thing in Acts 5. Interesting. That just popped in my head. So that's like squirrel. So, behold, I'm sending the promise on you. And now let's finish up with the ascension of Jesus. So verse 50. So he led them out as far as Bethany, and he lifted up his hands and he blessed them. And while he was blessing them, Luke simply says he was carried up into heaven. No extra adjectives, no amazing description that I would sure like to know. That's not Luke's message. Luke's message is he went back up into heaven. And they worshiped him, they returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and they were continually in the temple. That's where all the first Christians went. They hot-footed to the temple. Of course, that's where they worship God as a Jew. That's where they're now worshiping the Messiah, the culmination of the plan of God. And so, of course, they go there. We'll see in Acts 1, they were continuing in the temple. We'll see in Acts 3, Peter, James, and John went to the temple as was their custom, until the authorities of the temple kicked them out. Very sad. Kicked them out. Now, he mentions Bethany. I just want to mention one more little thing, and then our time will be up. Let's look at a little map of the Jerusalem hill. And so here, we have the Temple Mount on this high point. And you can see the whole city of Jerusalem is kind of built on kind of a mountain. Valleys all around it, kind of a mountain. And then here is the town of Bethany. Now, as this scale shows you, 1 mile is this distance. So now we don't know where Jesus was meeting with the disciples. But he went over here to the Kidron Valley, up around the Garden of Gethsemane. Here's the Mount of Olives, which you know Jesus frequented. And then he came around the valley over to Bethany. Now, why Bethany? Do we remember what other things happened very famously in Bethany? Lazarus was raised. That's where Simon the leper lived. And when Jesus was dining with him, this lady came with a box of this super expensive ointment called nard, this perfume, and anointed his feet. And Jesus said, look, she's anointing me. You know, it's like my burial anointing. It's her. And so it creates this great symmetry, I think, for the Gospel of Luke, having this last scene of Jesus and all the disciples walking on this couple of mile journey, 1 hour, 90 minutes maybe, to Bethany, where Lazarus was raised, where he was anointed by the lady with the nard, and then he's gone. And they were rejoicing in the temple. Next then will be, the Tom will pick up, will be the book of the activities, Luke volume 2. And we'll see that Luke will kind of start from this spot. Now, we don't know how much time elapsed in the writing of Luke, physical writing. But he's going to say the same thing as in Luke 1. Oh, Theophilus, here's some more information for you. Who was Theophilus? I kind of think he was high priest in AD 40 for a few years. Now, I can't say that for sure because there are many Theophilus. It's a very common name. But we'll see this is going to continue, and Luke is just going to segue into this. So Theophilus, whoever he is, most excellent Theophilus, so he and we have more information about what happened in the activities of the apostles. So thank you so much for your attention, and I hope when you read the scriptures you'll try to think of these folks more as real people with real problems and real trials, and look at why is the author presenting it this way? What's the message? What am I supposed to be getting? Am I supposed to be sympathizing with these people? What? And you'll see the beautiful, fantastic construction of the scriptures that we see. So thank you so much. Bless your hearts.